Welcome to the Deerfield Theater Podcast. In this season, we're talking about Deerfield's production of Murder on the Orient Express. In case you're tuning in and didn't already know, Deerfield Theater is putting on a production of Murder on the Orient Express this April of 2026, and performances start Friday, April 3rd, and only go through Sunday, April 12th. Where we kill the performances. So while you're listening to this episode, visit the link in the show notes and get your tickets. Without further delay, here's the interview. Welcome to another episode of the Deerfield Theater Podcast. Every episode is special, but we have with us only our second ever dramaturg on the podcast. I'm very excited to have Peter Forster. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, so let's learn more about you for our audience, Peter. Tell our audience about yourself and why you wanted to be dramaturg for this production of Murder on the Orient Express.
About myself, well, I grew up. I was a colonial child. I grew up in South Africa, and in sort of post-colonial South Africa, it was very little England. Or at least there were pockets of it that were very, and I grew up in one of those. I went to grade in high school there. I did my first 2 degrees there in English literature with a focus on dramatic literature. I did it, then I came here to the University of Illinois in Champaign. I did a master's degree in dramatic literature. Then I went to London and did a degree in directing for the theatre at the Drama Studio in London. And then years later, I did a degree in screenwriting at DePaul in Chicago. So there, does that answer enough? Is that enough?
I think that's more than sufficient. I think that qualifies you to be the dramaturg. Let's say overqualifies you to be the dramaturg.
Well, a dramaturg's job is interesting because the dramaturg, in my opinion, now, every situation is different than every dramaturg, but my sense of the dramaturg is that the dramaturg is the person who stands behind the people who stand behind the scenes. Right, so that what the dramaturg does is be available most. Dramaturgical work is about reading the production in its literary and cultural context. So with this one, we were lucky, of course, because it's 1934. And it is one, we'll talk about her, Christie, presently, and her particular style, but 1934, so Europe is beginning to be in upheaval. And on this train, this Orient Express, with which Agatha Christie was very familiar, there are representatives from all kinds of European countries and the United States. So what she's done is she has pulled together really the Western world and focused them on a crime. So it is really, I think, her only novel that is that international. She said a lot of things in what was then Mesopotamia, but she had a husband who was an archaeologist. She said things in various parts of Britain, but this is really sort of the world. So that's one of the reasons to get involved in this artifact. I grew up with women who always had an Agatha Christie novel at hand. And I don't know what the American sort of equivalent would have been to those novels, which everybody read, everybody knew, you know. So I came to this project with a with an attachment, I suppose, you know,
Hmm.
to it. And I have seen and enjoyed to varying degrees several adaptations of this novel. What's wonderful about this novel is it's so versatile. It can be adapted in so many ways. And this adaptation is very bold. You know.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Peter, because after all, this podcast, while it is just a great thing to get to know the people involved in the show, it is marketing, and we do want people to go buy their tickets. So you saying it's a very bold interpretation. If for those folks listening, remember, link to buy your tickets are in the show notes. Okay, but Peter, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please
No, no,
continue.
no. I mean, I think it's, I think, look, every adaptation does its thing,
Yeah.
and the adaptations of this, I've seen four. The adaptations of this novel have all been very different. I think that, and I think this adaptation will be particularly interesting to people who know the novel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's great for people who don't know, because of course it's got an ending that is a surprise. And in fact, Christie, was very particular about keeping the endings of her work secret. And in fact, if we get to talk about the Mousetrap, which is the longest running play in the history of the world, she was very, very clear that that ending had to be kept secret. So for people who haven't seen it, the ending is a surprise. For people who have seen it, the adaptation will be fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm? Because
Yeah.
it deviates. It definitely deviates in a in many very interesting ways.
Yeah, and then what I've learned, having interviewing three of the cast members so far, is also there's some composite characters because of the nature of a stage show versus a book versus a movie, and being able to keep the audience's attention in a shorter time frame. That there have been some characters that maybe are combined compared to the book. Is that
That's
is that
right.
right?
Yeah. I mean, what Ken Ludwig has done is reduce the 12 to 9. And you have to draw your own conclusions about why,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know. And I don't know, truly, Matt, if it's for reasons of staging. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's made a decision, and I think we need to figure it out for ourselves. It's interesting.
And,
There are
and
several reasons why he could have done
and just you were pointing out the time period that it was. We could look at the world today. Now, when we picked Murder on the Orient Express, we picked it last year, but
it.
it
Right?
somehow is more, that was prescient. It's very relevant maybe to go
Mm-hmm.
see a show like this in today's current world in light of in light of
Right?
political events, shall we say.
Right? And, you know, this is something about, you know, because her, particularly her crimes, are so specific, they resonate in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, these, because they are really all about human stories and what happens to human beings when they are thrown into these extreme situations. And she loves an enclosed space, you know. So yeah, and it is, they are terribly relevant. I mean, the politics now and the politics in 34 and the swing, the global political swing is fascinating. Because I think one could set this play now and it would work. Do you know what I mean? You could introduce contemporary technology. You could, and and Google, and it would still work.
Well, in particular, if you're on a fast moving train, look, I will sometimes take the metro from the suburbs to Chicago, and my phone doesn't work because it's traveling too fast between towers, right?
Right, right.
So you even in the modern setting, some of that technology might be there and present, but it strips away its usefulness when you're on a fast moving train.
Well, you can bet that if Agatha Christie were writing it, that would happen.
Right.
They would find themselves bereft of their resources,
Mm-hmm.
which is the function. I mean, in this text, the train hits a snowdrift and is stopped, which would, of course, be the equivalent of a kind of technological blackout, because they're completely stranded.
So in some of like talk about what you've done for this particular show so far and how you're helping the production team and the cast.
Every dramaturg works for the director. So the dramaturg feels out what the director needs or is instructed. What I've done here is I've created several documents for the cast and for the production team. For example, what was going on in the world, what was going on in the world, and what was going on for each of the characters in that world. And with direct reference to Agatha Christie's descriptions of these characters, which are not always the same as Ludwig, but I think that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And then, sort of bullet points about what was happening in that country at that time. I did a timeline of Agatha Christie and when she wrote, because, when she wrote what she wrote and sort of the trajectory of her life. Because really, it has been, I have not interfered at all in the production. I've only sort of supplemented the information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm obviously available to anybody all the time, but they have been very wonderfully independent. I made recommendations for musical choices, for pre-show visuals, for post-show music.
Yeah.
It's actually been a delightful and very easy experience.
Would you say like your role and the role of the dramaturg then, based on what you've explained, how you've helped out for this show, is to increase immersion both for the cast and their characters, but then also for the audience coming to see the show?
That's exactly what. Context. It's all about context. What should I know? Equally importantly, what should I not know?
Mm-hmm.
For a thriller, there were several things that really sort of inspired Agatha Christie for this. One was the kidnapping of the Lindbergh thing. You remember that the child was abducted from her home. That was very important. That is very important and revealed very early or at least that was very important.
Yeah.
Her experiences on the Orient Express, there had been a terrible incident in the late 20s where she wasn't on the train at the time, but the Orient Express had got stuck in a snowdrift, and it was terrible because they ran out of coal, they couldn't heat, They ran out of food. They were they were starving. They were freezing. Um, that's important to the kind of what I was going to say the mood, but it's really the theme.
Mhm.
You know, and of course her real and amazing sense of human depravity. You know, I mean, here was this sort of middle class, well, upper middle class, sort of lady writer who she understood, you know, the depths of, yeah, which, is interesting. Even though her novels aren't certainly not horror, but yeah. So I don't even know what we were talking. What were we
Well, we're
talking about?
talking about Murder on the Orient Express and Agatha Christie, of course.
You know, I think audiences will be interested in the tonal shift. If, for those who know the novel and for those who have seen other adaptations of this piece, I think they'll be very interested in the tonal shift of this adaptation.
Yeah.
And not only the reduction in number, but the interesting kind of adaptations of individual characters. You know, yeah.
So
I think it's going to be really, really, and I do think Matt has cast it very interesting. I do. I think it's going to be really interesting.
have you
No,
seen?
interesting. I don't know how else, what else,
Yeah, yeah. Have you? I don't know. Have you seen Brian's mustache that he's growing for Hercule?
No, I haven't. I haven't. But Poirot was famous for the mustache. That Poirot character is interesting in Christie's life because she invented him in well, he was first published in 1920. She wrote a novel called The Mysterious Affair of Style in 1916. And then nobody wanted it, and nobody wanted it, and she had been rejected countless times until this publishing house in 1920 published it. And in it was this odd, fastidious, vain Belgian, ex-Belgian detective, fled Belgium after the First War and found himself in London, Hercule Poirot. And he captured the reader's imagination. And she could never let go, because obviously.
Yeah. You said something earlier that really stuck with me, and it was how it's all about the context. And as I think, I'm a father, but of my daughter is she's a little older than 5 now. But in thinking about how do I impart and pass on all the wisdom of what I've obtained to her, and trying to boil that down, is really, I think it all comes down to 2 words, and that is context matters, right? You could kind of extrapolate,
Absolutely.
right, that idea of context, and whether that's to make a more immersive, play, or for really anything. Like, it all kind of comes down to the context and what you know and don't know, or should know and
That's
shouldn't
right.
know.
That's right. And that's so interesting because I think of course, you're right. And certainly in terms of literary genre, it's culture. What's the culture in which this context, plays out or exists? Yeah,
Yeah, it has completely different meanings if the culture is different.
yes.
Yeah.
And certainly in Agatha Christie's world, literary world, she wrote this Poirot, who was the most famous detective in the world, at least He says so. Ex-Belgian policeman, London, private detective, famous, wealthy, increasingly wealthy, renowned. But then she also created, I don't know, 1930, I think, or 29. She also created a little woman, a little old lady in a little unknown village called St. Mary Mead. Her name was Miss Marple. And she became Agatha Christie's second most famous creation because the Miss Marple mystery, this little lady sits by her fire knitting, and by sheer power of imagination can solve the most obscure crimes. And this is the thing about Christie. It's these tiny clues that Poirot can pick up on. He notices that Marple, it will come down to the color of the ink on a letter, or the way, the direction in which a lady twirls her pearls, or you know, tiny clues, all of which are deeply rooted in the context. These stately homes, or the train, and the year, because the 30s were an incredibly important and productive decade for Christie. Because 34, of course, was Orient Express. 1930, she met second husband, the archaeologist. Then she wrote like her four most famous novels in the 30s. And, The Mysterious Affair of Styles is still the world's biggest selling crime novel.
Stepping back even more and just like looking, at human culture or Western culture, our if not obsession, our great interest in the detective, right? Yes, you've got Hercule Poirot, you mentioned Miss Marple, Sherlock Holmes, right? I would even say, like, for TV, like Monk, if you've ever watched that show,
yes,
Monk. Dr. House from House, right? Like this role of the detective and like our interest in solving the mystery. Like, what is it about human nature?
That's right. And now, of course, context-wise, we have the great rise of our fascination with true crime.
Mm-hmm.
And, our fascination with solving true crime. But we have always loved the detective. And in fact, speaking of Sherlock Holmes, for example, in 1926, Agatha Christie disappeared. She disappeared for 11 days and nobody could find her. And Conan Doyle, in fact, of course, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, he consulted, because, obviously there's a relationship between the creator and the created.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He consulted spiritualists and clairvoyants to help them find her. So, yeah, we love detectives.
And look, I mean, that might be a great place to end it, because that is like, come and see the show. We love detectives. We love mysteries. There was a murder. It's in a constrained environment, right?
Exactly. And whether you know this particular story or not, this is a different experience. Because even if you know how it ends, you will be fascinated by how it unfolds. But it's different this time. Well, can you say it's the same yet different? I don't know if you could say that, but I just did.
All right. Well, I guess folks will need to come and see for themselves then.
And they won't be sorry.
Well, with that, Peter Forster, thanks again so much for coming on the Deerfield Theater Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. Please share this podcast to help support the work of Deerfield Theater. An even better way to support us is to go see Murder on the Orient Express. To purchase tickets, visit deerfieldtheater.com or click the link in the show notes. Thank you to the production staff and cast for Murder on the Orient Express. Please follow us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred listening app to never miss an episode. Until next time, thanks to everyone who continues to support the arts. We'll see you at the theater.